Join me today as we talk a little bit about intercompany comic book crossovers. Welcome to the Geek Cabal channel. My name is Bob, and today we're going to be talking about intercompany crossovers in comic books. So by that I mean like Marvel and DC crossing over, or DC and Dark Horse, or DC and Image, or any of the other companies DC crosses over with that Marvel doesn't seem to want to. Now I'm talking about this because we're hopefully going to be talking about something in the upcoming podcast episode. Have to apologize, folks. I'm sitting in a parking lot and I'm watching one of the greatest displays of stupid driving imaginable. The parking lot is set up in such a way so that the spots are facing certain directions, they're not just straight across. And a gentleman is backing up the wrong way to drive the wrong way down the lane. And he has to keep stopping because people that know how to drive are coming the other way. What a moron. Anyway, I should probably not record these while I'm actually driving sometimes, because I'm not going to lie, I'm firmly of the belief that one doesn't know what anger is until one gets behind the wheel and has to deal with other people. But anyway, that aside, came across an interesting article that hopefully we're going to talk about in the podcast. And so I wanted to lay a little groundwork in case anyone had further interest on the topic before we get to it. So for those of you who are unaware, there are, comics are all published by corporations, or some by individuals, but usually they have a company. An imprint, I believe is what they call it. So like Marvel owns all the characters that you would see in the MCU, Spider-Man, I'm drawing a complete blank, this is really terrible, like Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Avengers, characters like that. DC owns, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, the Justice League, characters like that. Now, typically, because corporations being what they are, DC can't just be like, hey, let's throw the X-Men into a comic book. Like that just legally can't happen. However, in years gone by, the companies would have official crossovers, and some of them are, decent. I've not read it, but I hear the Predator Batman crossover is actually really good. That's one you won't see reprinted anytime soon, by the way. But I may as well go ahead and explain my comment there. Now that Marvel is owned by Disney, and DC has been owned by Warner Bros. For years, but particularly now that Marvel's owned by Disney, the idea of a crossover is very, very slim, and to reprint any crossover would require both companies' permission, because both companies own the characters involved in the book. So, I believe like there's an old, I know there's a Green Lantern Silver Surfer crossover, which is the prelude to the official Marvel versus DC crossover that happened in the 90s. But as far as the Predator Batman thing, there it's because Disney now also owns Fox, which owns Predator and Alien, which at the time had comics being printed by Dark Horse Comics, and they crossed over with DC on a number of different issues. But now that they're owned by Disney, Disney moved the license from Dark Horse to Marvel. So any crossover is going to need the permission of Marvel and Disney. So reprinting them is unlikely, because now they've shifted from they were I'll learn to talk one of these days. They were a DC Dark Horse crossover, but now they are technically a DC Marvel crossover. So unlikely to be reprinted anytime soon. although we're going to touch on that a little bit in the podcast. So these books, in theory, will have a certain value after enough time has passed because they're in the 90s. They've got probably fairly high printing runs. However, there are earlier crossovers. There used to be a couple of trade paperbacks that collected the older crossovers between Marvel and DC. I want to say there's a Spider-Man Superman crossover and maybe X-Men and Teen Titans. I could be wrong on that. I haven't read either one. I know there's an X-Men Star Trek crossover. That was interesting. I think it also had a Next Generation counterpart. I don't know if Xavier ever met Picard, but would have been great. So you have these, and the one in particular though that's interesting is Marvel versus DC. It was a 4-issue series where you find out that each universe has an avatar of sorts that represents their universe. And you see this in the main Marvel comics, and I imagine DC. Whereas in Marvel, it would be like Eternity. Is it Eternity? I think it's Eternity. Could be wrong on that. Wow. These people do not know how to drive in this parking lot. That's the second vehicle. And by the way, I should note that I almost hit 2 vehicles coming into this row, coming the wrong way. So yeah, these people just don't know how to drive. They should have their license revoked and be forced to be subjected to public transport. But anyway, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Eternity. He is like the living embodiment of the universe. Okay. Well, you had something like that. Only these 2 beings are brothers, and their primary colors are red and blue. One of them is predominantly red. One of them is predominantly blue. Because way back when, one was all red and one was all blue, and they fought each other and annihilated each other. So that whenever they're destroyed, bits and pieces of themselves crossed over into the other realities. And so it's taken all this time for them to reconstitute, regain consciousness and everything else. And now they're both awakened, and they've both found each other again. Neither one likes the fact they've been polluted with the other, and so they've decided on basically a cosmic death match. But they don't want to make the same mistake again and destroy each other. So they're going to have their champions from among the heroes fight it out. And if I recall correctly, there were 11 fights. Some of them fans were allowed to vote on, which is the only way certain people won some fights. Because some of them should be pretty lopsided. Like Aquaman and Namor should probably go to Aquaman because of his ability to control fish, and Namor is part fish. But if it came down to a pure slugfest, I believe Namor would win. I believe he's significantly stronger and can fly. Then you had like Wolverine and Lobo, where Lobo, I've seen a panel where he is talking with his head missing. I don't mean he's carrying his head and it's talking. I mean words are coming out of the trunk where his head used to be, and he's walking around. That is so far above and beyond Wolverine's capacity for damage dealing and sustaining from Lobo's counterattack that Lobo should have easily won that fight. So I'm pretty sure that was a fan vote. You had Captain America and Batman, which I believe was technically a draw, although one of them might have finally actually won due to purely by circumstance, because they were the most evenly matched. It was a case of sooner or later Captain America would win because he doesn't tire, and Batman does, eventually. You had Jubilee and Robin, the Flash and Quicksilver, which again, the Flash is magnitudes faster than Quicksilver, so that shouldn't have been a challenge. Thor and Shazam, Captain Marvel, DC Captain Marvel, fought. I don't remember who won that one. Wonder Woman and Storm fought it out. The Hulk and Superman, where Superman won, but he acknowledged that I believe at the time he said that the Hulk hit him harder than anything he's ever been hit by before. So, well, that fight's pretty great. The opening panel is the Juggernaut is terrorizing Metropolis because the two worlds are like bits and pieces are crossing over, and Superman and the Hulk are both standing there and both punch him at the same time and knock him out, and then the two of them start fighting. Spider-Man fought Superboy and somehow beat him. Um, yeah, and there's a few others. So the interesting part is once you get to issue 3 of 4, where one of the two worlds is going to be destroyed. And to ensure that neither is destroyed, the Spectre and the Living Tribunal join forces and merge the two realities to make the Amalgam universe. And for 1 month, they printed a bunch of issues that they weren't like number ones. They were like right in the middle of stories and everything. They had all kinds of backstory you knew nothing about. You had no idea how they finished up later. Well, it had the merged characters. And this is where you got characters like Dark Claw, who was a merger of Wolverine and Batman. His sidekick was, if I recall correctly, her name was Sparrow. It was Jubilee and Robin. His archenemy was the Hyena, the Joker, and Sabretooth. Apparently, Bill Clinton was the president in both realities because he was the president here. So I'm assuming it's Bill Clinton merged with Bill Clinton. Uh, yeah, so you had that. You had another Dark Claw issue that was a different storyline. You had Super Soldier, who was Captain America and Superman. The Super Soldier serum was Kryptonian DNA. The Green Skull was Lex Luthor and the Red Skull merged together. You had the Big Question, who was the Kingpin and the Riddler. And just then you had a handful were really weird. They're like more than 2 characters, like Doctor Strange Fate was Doctor Strange, Doctor Fate, and Professor X. Uh, but yeah, so you just had all these weird combinations, and then there's a storyline kind of weaving its way through a few of the issues where there's a character that I believe Marvel and DC both co-own named Access. He can control moving between the realities, and so he separates things again, and the heroes are stuck with the fact the two brothers are about to fight it out, and which will cause again mutual annihilation. So, knowing that they stand no chance, they launch a counterattack against them. And in that moment, the two brothers peer into the souls, minds, I don't remember exactly how it worked, of a couple of the champions, Batman and Captain America, if I recall correctly. And they're both humbled by the fact that, beings like this regularly fight alongside gods and, risk their lives to save other people and everything else. And so the two brothers kind of stop fighting and look at each other and simultaneously are both like, "You've done well, brother," and go their separate ways. And yeah, it was a truly unique moment in these kinds of crossovers that I wish we would see again, but I don't know if it's ever going to happen. There were a few crossovers after that. There's a JLA Avengers crossover that George Perez did the artwork for it, and features probably one of the greatest images ever out of a comic book, which is Superman having with Captain America's shield and Mjolnir getting ready to lay the smackdown on somebody. So yeah, now that book actually did get reprinted a couple years ago because George Perez, who has unfortunately passed away since then, was facing cancer, and they did it so that some of the proceeds could go to help him and help set up his family for afterwards, because he knew it was terminal at that point. And so a run of paperback copies were printed, like they instantly sold out, and they, unless you jumped on the pre-order, and it was basically impossible to do that, you really had to go through another buyer or seller, then yeah, they were pretty expensive on the secondary market. I splurged and got my hands on one of them. I'd much prefer a hardcover, but this is my only real choice here. So yeah, so some of these do have some value on the secondary market. because everyone knows they're never going to be reprinted, or at least that's the way it looks at the moment. So we'll see on that. I think there's a possibility of somewhere down the road, maybe, but it's kind of what we're going to talk about in the podcast. So anyway, hope you guys like this little talk, this little trip down memory lane to 90s Marvel and DC comics. One of the better things to come out of the 90s, in my opinion. And like I said, if you're ever after the whole collection, there are, I want to say it's 3 paperbacks, because they didn't survive into the omnibus era that we're in now, where they'd be reprinted in hardback, which is the way I'd prefer to have them. But I've got most of them as single issues. So there's the actual Marvel vs. DC event, which I believe is just the 4 issues. I could be wrong. There's, I believe, 2 Amalgam books that cover all of the issues. And then if you actually want the complete story, you need the Green Lantern Silver Surfer crossover that came before it, that sets up the story itself. And that's where Green Lantern and Silver Surfer crossover, and Darkseid and Thanos fight it out a little bit. Yeah, that one's actually pretty good in my opinion. But like I said, the big thing is it's the prelude. It's the last few pages sets up the Marvel vs. DC crossover. So anyway, folks, hopefully we're going to talk about this more in the podcast. I'll link back to this video in the podcast, but if you've already seen this, you don't care about that. But this is a topic that's going to come up there, hopefully. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and hopefully in editing I'll be able to find some awesome artwork to post here, or here, somewhere, all the places, I don't know. If not, sorry you had to look at me the whole time. But anyway, that's about all I got for this one, guys. So, it's YouTube, so do all the things, the like, the share, the subscribe, all that fun stuff. But otherwise, let me know if you want to hear about any other comic books. I've got a bunch of stuff from the 90s through to today. There's a big gap in the early 2000s where I stopped reading for a while, but I'm slowly filling that with the collected editions. But it's taking time. But anyway, folks, hopefully you stuck around through all this. And thank you if you did. And in the meantime, I don't know, Excelsior. Let's go with that. See you later.